in the depths of human imagination, where shadows dance with memory and the boundary between life and death grows thin as morning mist, there exists a realm that has captivated minds for over 3 millennia. The Greek Underworld, that vast subterranean kingdom ruled by gods both terrible and just, emerged from the collective dreams of ancient peoples who gazed into dark caves and wondered what lay beyond the final breath. As you settle into comfort this evening, let your mind drift back to those earliest days when the Mediterranean world was young and stories were born not from books, but from the whispered fears and hopes of souls gathered around flickering fires. The story begins, as all great tales must, in the mists of prehistory, when the ancestors of the Greeks wandered into the mountainous peninsulas and scattered islands of what would become Hellas. These Bronze Age peoples, carrying with them the cultural memories of distant migrations, encountered landscapes that seemed to breathe with supernatural presence. Deep caverns yawned in limestone cliffs, hot springs bubbled from hidden depths, and earthquake tremors reminded mortals that the earth itself was alive with divine power. In these natural phenomena, they perceived the workings of a hidden world beneath their feet, a realm where the forces that governed life and death held court in eternal darkness. Archaeological evidence from sites like Knossos and Mycenae reveals that by the 2nd millennium before our era, elaborate burial practices and underground chambers already suggested a sophisticated understanding of death as journey rather than ending. The peoples of these early Greek civilizations buried their dead with grave goods, weapons, and precious objects, clearly believing that the deceased would need such items in whatever realm awaited them. Linear B tablets from Pylos and Knossos record offerings to chthonic deities, gods of the earth's depths whose names would echo through centuries of religious practice. Even then, in those distant Bronze Age kingdoms, the Greeks were developing the foundational concepts that would eventually blossom into their rich mythology of the underworld. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into rest, imagine the slow transformation of these ancient beliefs across the centuries following the Bronze Age collapse. When the Great Palace civilizations fell around 1200 BCE, their elaborate mythologies did not vanish, but rather sank deep into the collective memory of the Greek peoples, like seeds waiting for the proper season to grow. During the subsequent Dark Age, as communities scattered and reformed, as new tribes arrived and old traditions evolved, the stories of the underworld took on new shapes and deeper meanings. Traveling bards, those wandering keepers of cultural memory, carried fragments of these tales from settlement to settlement, weaving them into larger narratives that would eventually coalesce into the great epic cycles. The earliest literary evidence of the Greek underworld appears in Homer's magnificent epics, composed in the 8th century BCE, but preserving much older traditions. In the Iliad, we glimpse a shadowy realm called Hades, named after its dark sovereign, where the souls of the dead exist as pale shadows of their former selves. Homer's underworld is a grim and cheerless place, neither punishment nor reward, but simply a colourless continuation of existence. The dead, called psyche or souls, are described as flitting about like bats, retaining the appearance of their living forms, but possessing no strength or substance. They can speak only after drinking blood, which temporarily restores their memories and personalities. This Homeric vision of death reflects the aristocratic warrior culture of early Greece, where honour and glory in life were paramount precisely because death offered so little. The hero Achilles, when encountered by Odysseus in the underworld, delivers the famous lament that it would be better to be a landless laborer among the living than a king among the dead. Yet even in this bleak conception, we can discern the seeds of later, more complex mythologies. The underworld has geography, the rivers Styx and Charon, the gates guarded by the monstrous hound Cerberus, the meadows where souls wander in eternal twilight. The Odyssey provides our most detailed early description of the underworld in the famous Nekia, the summoning of the dead. Odysseus travels to the edge of the world, to a place where the river ocean meets the underworld's boundaries, and there performs a ritual sacrifice to attract the spirits of the dead. The scene is both terrifying and profoundly moving, as Odysseus encounters his mother, his fallen comrades from Troy, and the great heroes of the past. Through this episode, Homer establishes many of the fundamental features of the Greek underworld: its physical separation from the world of the living, the necessity of proper burial rites, the importance of memory and fame in preserving identity after death, and the possibility, however limited, of communication between the living and the dead. As the centuries passed and Greek civilization emerged from its dark age, the simple Homeric vision of the underworld began to evolve and complexify. The rise of the polis, the Greek city-state, brought with it new religious practices, new philosophical questions, and new ways of thinking about justice, morality, and the fate of the soul. Mystery religions, secret cults that promised initiates special knowledge about death and the afterlife, began to flourish throughout the Greek world. The most famous of these were the Eleusinian mysteries, centered on the worship of Demeter and her daughter Persephone, whose story would become central to Greek underworld mythology. The myth of Demeter and Persephone, sometimes called the core or maiden, represents one of the most profound and influential developments in Greek thinking about death and rebirth. The story tells of how Persephone, while gathering flowers in a meadow, was abducted by Hades, lord of the underworld, who had fallen in love with her beauty. Her mother Demeter, goddess of grain and the harvest, searched frantically for her daughter, and in her grief, she caused all vegetation to wither and die. The earth became barren, and humanity faced starvation. Finally, Zeus intervened and arranged for Persephone's return, but because she had eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she was bound to spend part of each year there as Hades' queen. This myth served multiple purposes in Greek culture. On one level, it explained the seasonal cycle, with Persephone's annual return to the upper world marking the coming of spring, and her descent marking the onset of winter. But on a deeper level, it transformed the Greek understanding of death from the Homeric vision of permanent exile to a more hopeful conception of cyclical renewal. Death became not an ending, but a transformation, part of the eternal rhythm of nature itself. For initiates into the Eleusinian mysteries, this myth promised that just as Persephone returned from the dead, so too might they hope for some form of blessed existence after death. The influence of this myth on Greek thought cannot be overstated. It introduced the concept of the underworld as a place of potential transformation, rather than mere punishment or oblivion. Persephone herself became a bridge figure, dwelling in both worlds and possessing knowledge of both life and death. As queen of the underworld, she would play a crucial role in later developments of Greek afterlife mythology, often appearing as a compassionate figure who could intercede on behalf of the souls of the dead. As you feel your breathing slow and deepen, let your imagination drift to the great cultural flowering of the archaic and classical periods, when the Greek understanding of the underworld reached its full mythological complexity. During the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, as Greek colonies spread throughout the Mediterranean, and contact with other cultures intensified, new ideas about death and judgment began to permeate Greek religious thought. The influence of Egyptian beliefs about judgment after death, Persian concepts of cosmic dualism between good and evil, and indigenous traditions from various parts of the Greek world all contributed to an increasingly sophisticated and morally complex vision of the afterlife. It was during this period that the figure of Hades himself began to evolve from the shadowy Homeric death god into the fully realized ruler of the underworld, familiar to us from classical mythology. Originally, Hades was primarily known by various euphemistic names: Pluton, meaning the wealthy one, referring to his dominion over the precious metals buried in the earth, or Klimenos, meaning the renowned one. The Greeks were reluctant to speak his true name aloud, fearing to attract his attention. This reticence reflects the ancient Greek understanding that death was not evil, but simply inevitable and fearsome, deserving of respect rather than worship. The mythological biography of Hades begins with the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympian gods. According to Hesiod's Theogony, composed in the 8th century BCE, Hades was one of the 6 children of the Titans Kronos and Rhea. His father, fearing a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, swallowed each child at birth. Only Zeus escaped this fate, hidden away by their mother, and when he came of age, he forced Kronos to regurgitate his siblings. Hades emerged from his father's stomach fully grown, and together with his brothers Zeus and Poseidon, he led the younger gods in their successful rebellion against the Titans. After their victory, the 3 brothers divided the cosmos among themselves by lot. Zeus received dominion over the sky, Poseidon over the seas, and Hades over the underworld and all the dead. This division established the fundamental structure of the Greek cosmic order, with Hades ruling a realm as vast and important as those of his brothers, though far more mysterious and terrible. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon, who frequently involved themselves in the affairs of mortals, Hades remained largely aloof from the upper world, appearing in myths primarily when his sovereignty over the dead was challenged, or when he ventured forth to claim new subjects for his realm. The physical description of Hades in Greek art and literature emphasizes his awesome and terrible majesty. He is typically portrayed as a mature bearded man, sometimes seated on a throne made of ebony and adorned with precious stones, sometimes driving a chariot drawn by black horses. His symbols include the cypress tree, associated with mourning and death, the narcissus flower, which figures in the story of Persephone's abduction, and the cornucopia or horn of plenty, reflecting his role as Pluton, bringer of the Earth's mineral wealth. Most famously, he carries a staff or scepter and wears a helmet of invisibility, forged for him by the Cyclopes, which allows him to move unseen through both the upper and lower worlds. Despite his fearsome reputation, Hades was generally regarded as a just ruler rather than an evil one. Unlike later Christian conceptions of Satan, Hades was not a tempter or corrupter, but simply the administrator of death's natural laws. He was inexorable but not cruel, accepting all souls equally regardless of their mortal status or deeds. This aspect of his character reflects the early Greek acceptance of death as a natural and inevitable part of existence, neither to be feared as punishment, nor welcomed as reward, but simply endured as the common fate of all mortals. The realm over which Hades presided grew increasingly complex and detailed as Greek mythology developed through the classical period. The underworld came to be envisioned as a vast subterranean kingdom, complete with rivers, plains, mountains, and cities. The geography of this realm reflected both physical observations of caves, and underground waterways, and symbolic representations of the journey from life to death. The most famous of the underworld's features were its rivers, each with its own mythological significance and role in the passage of souls. The River Styx, whose name means hateful or shuddering, was the most important of these waterways. It formed the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, and crossing it marked the irreversible transition from life to death. The Styx was also the river by which the gods swore their most solemn oaths, for even the immortals feared to break a promise made in its name. According to myth, any god who swore falsely by the Styx would fall into a coma-like sleep for a year, followed by 9 years of exile from the divine community. This connection between the river of death and the binding power of oaths reflects the Greek understanding that death was the ultimate guarantee of truth, the final arbitrator before which all deceptions must fail. The ferryman Charon, that grim and ancient boatman, was responsible for transporting souls across the Styx. Described as an old man with burning eyes and a white beard, dressed in tattered robes, Charon demanded payment for his services. The obol, a small coin traditionally placed in the mouth or on the eyes of the dead during burial. Those who could not pay were condemned to wander the shores of the Styx for 100 years before being allowed to cross. This detail reflects the importance of proper burial rites in Greek culture, as families who failed to provide the funeral obol condemned their loved ones to prolonged suffering in the afterlife. Beyond the Styx lay the other rivers of the underworld, each representing different aspects of death and judgment. The Charon, river of woe, was where souls first arrived, and where they encountered Charon's ferry. The Cocytus, river of lamentation, was fed by the tears of all who grieved for the dead. The Phlegethon, river of fire, burned with flames that tormented the wicked. And finally, the Lethe, river of forgetfulness, whose waters erased all memory of earthly life from souls destined for reincarnation. As you feel the gentle pull of sleep beginning to take hold, let your mind's eye follow the path of a soul newly arrived in this twilight realm. Having crossed the Styx in Charon's boat, the soul would next encounter Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound who guarded the gates of Hades' kingdom. This creature, described as having the body of a lion, a mane of serpents, and a dragon's tail, served to prevent both the living from entering the underworld and the dead from escaping it. Cerberus was no mindless beast, but an intelligent guardian who could be overcome only through cleverness, music, or divine intervention, as demonstrated by heroes like Orpheus and Heracles in their legendary journeys to the underworld. Once past Cerberus, souls entered the true realm of Hades, a landscape that reflected the Greek understanding of death as both ending and transformation. The earliest arrivals found themselves in the asphodel meadows, vast fields of pale flowers where the majority of the dead spent their existence. These were neither the virtuous nor the wicked, but the common run of humanity, destined to an eternity of shadowy half-life among the ghostly asphodels. The meadows were neither pleasant nor unpleasant, neither reward nor punishment, but simply a neutral continuation of existence, stripped of its vitality and purpose. For those souls judged to have lived particularly virtuous lives, a different fate awaited in the Elysian Fields, also known as the Isles of the Blessed. This paradise within the underworld was ruled by Kronos, the dethroned Titan king who'd been allowed to reign over this pleasant realm as compensation for his defeat in the Titanomachi. In Elysium, the blessed dead enjoyed eternal spring, gentle breezes, and all the pleasures of life without its pains. They could engage in their favorite earthly activities. Warriors could practice combat, musicians could perform, athletes could compete, all without fatigue or injury. Some myths suggested that souls who had lived 3 successive virtuous lives could choose to remain permanently in Elysium rather than being reincarnated. But for those judged to have lived lives of particular wickedness, the underworld held darker regions of punishment. Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld, served as both prison and place of torment for the most heinous sinners. Originally conceived as simply the lowest point in the cosmos, Tartarus gradually evolved into an active place of punishment, where the wicked endured eternal torments specifically designed to reflect their earthly crimes. The development of Tartarus as a place of moral punishment represents one of the most significant evolutions in Greek religious thought, reflecting the growing importance of ethical considerations in determining one's fate after death. The most famous inhabitants of Tartarus were the great sinners of mythology, whose stories served as cautionary tales about the consequences of hubris and impiety. Tantalus, who had murdered his own son and served him as food to the gods, stood forever in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink, beneath fruit trees whose branches withdrew whenever he reached for them. His eternal hunger and thirst gave rise to the word tantalize, describing the torture of having one's desires perpetually frustrated. Sisyphus, the cunning king who had twice cheated death and revealed the secrets of the gods, was condemned to roll a massive boulder up a steep hill for all eternity. Each time he neared the summit, the boulder would roll back down, forcing him to begin anew. His punishment embodied the futility of trying to outwit fate or escape the natural order of life and death. The daughters of Danaus, known as the Danaids, who had murdered their husbands on their wedding night, were forced to carry water in jars with holes in the bottom, forever attempting to fill a bathtub that could never be filled. Their punishment reflected the Greek understanding that some crimes against the natural order, particularly those involving betrayal of sacred bonds like marriage, required eternal expiation. These mythological punishments were not merely arbitrary torments, but carefully constructed moral lessons that reflected Greek values and concerns. They emphasized the importance of honoring the gods, respecting natural relationships, accepting one's fate, and maintaining proper boundaries between mortal and divine realms. The eternal nature of these punishments underscored the Greek belief that some actions had consequences that extended far beyond mortal life. As the night deepens around you and your consciousness begins to drift towards sleep, consider how these mythological foundations evolved during the classical period of Greek civilization. The 5th and 4th centuries BCE witnessed an unprecedented flowering of artistic, philosophical, and religious creativity that transformed the underworld from a collection of traditional stories into a sophisticated theological and philosophical system. The great tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, explored the psychological and moral dimensions of death and judgment in their plays, while philosophers like Plato began to develop systematic theories about the soul's immortality and its journey through death. The visual arts also played a crucial role in shaping Greek conceptions of the underworld. Red figure and black figure pottery from this period depicts scenes of underworld mythology with increasing sophistication and detail. Vase paintings show Hades' abduction of Persephone, Orpheus' journey to retrieve Eurydice, Heracles' capture of Cerberus, and the judgment of souls by underworld deities. These images were not merely decorative, but served important religious and educational functions, helping to standardize and disseminate mythological narratives throughout the Greek world. The development of formal judgment procedures for souls represents one of the most significant innovations of the classical period. Earlier Greek traditions had generally portrayed the underworld as a place where all souls suffered the same dim fate, with only a few exceptional individuals receiving special treatment. However, by the 5th century BCE, the concept of post-mortem judgment based on moral behavior had become central to Greek afterlife beliefs. This development reflected the increasing importance of ethical philosophy and the growing belief that justice must ultimately prevail, even if it was not always apparent in mortal life. The judges of the dead, according to classical Greek mythology, were 3 figures from the heroic past who had been granted their positions because of their wisdom and fairness during their earthly lives. Minos, the legendary king of Crete, served as the chief judge, presiding over the initial assessment of newly arrived souls. His reputation for justice and law-giving made him an ideal candidate for this role, and his association with Crete, that island civilization that had seemed so ancient and mysterious to classical Greeks, added to his authority as a figure from the distant past. Rhadamanthys, brother of Minos and another king of Crete, served as judge over the souls of those from Asia and the eastern lands. His name became synonymous with inflexible justice, and his judgments were considered final and unappealable. Aeacus, king of Aegina and grandfather of Achilles, judged the souls of Europeans. Together, these 3 judges would hear the deeds of each soul and determine its appropriate destination within the underworld, whether to the neutral asphodel meadows, the blessed Elysian Fields, or the punitive depths of Tartarus. The process of judgment was envisioned as a formal tribunal, with the soul required to give an account of its earthly life and deeds. Some sources suggest that the souls appeared naked before their judges, stripped of all earthly pretenses and distinctions, their true moral character visible to divine perception. This nakedness of the soul before judgment became a powerful metaphor in later Greek philosophy and religion, representing the ultimate accountability that awaits all mortals, regardless of their worldly status or achievements. The classical period also saw the full development of the Orphic mysteries, a religious movement that offered initiates detailed knowledge about the underworld and specific instructions for navigating its challenges. Named after the legendary musician Orpheus, who had journeyed to the underworld to retrieve his beloved Eurydice, the Orphic tradition developed elaborate texts describing the soul's journey after death and providing formulaic responses to questions posed by underworld guardians. The Orphic gold tablets, thin sheets of gold inscribed with religious instructions and found in graves throughout the Greek world, provide fascinating insights into these mystery teachings. The tablets contain passwords and phrases that the deceased soul could use to identify itself to underworld deities, as well as detailed maps of the underworld's geography and warnings about various hazards the soul might encounter. One tablet instructs the soul: "You will find to the left of the house of Hades a spring, and by it a white cypress tree standing. Do not approach this spring. You will find another spring flowing forth from the lake of memory. Guards stand before it. Say, I'm a child of earth and starry sky, but my lineage is heavenly. You yourselves know this, but I am parched with thirst and I perish. Come, give me at once the cold water flowing forth from the lake of memory." These texts reveal a sophisticated understanding of the underworld as a complex bureaucracy, requiring specific knowledge and proper procedures to navigate successfully. They also reflect the growing influence of Eastern religious ideas, particularly the concept of the soul as a divine spark temporarily imprisoned in mortal flesh, destined to return to its celestial origins after death. This represents a significant departure from earlier Greek ideas about the soul's fate, suggesting influence from Pythagorean philosophy and various mystery religions that promised spiritual transformation rather than mere survival after death. The story of Orpheus himself became one of the most influential underworld myths in Greek culture. According to the most common version of the tale, Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived, son of the muse Calliope, and gifted with such extraordinary skill that his music could charm wild beasts, move stones, and bend trees to his will. When his beloved wife Eurydice died from a serpent's bite on their wedding day, Orpheus was so grief-stricken that he resolved to journey to the underworld and attempt to bring her back to life. Armed only with his lyre, Orpheus descended through a cave entrance to the underworld and began his perilous journey through Hades' realm. His music was so beautiful and his grief so genuine that it moved even the merciless inhabitants of the underworld to pity. Charon ferried him across the Styx without payment. Cerberus fell asleep at the sound of his lyre, and the tormented souls in Tartarus found temporary relief from their sufferings. Even the Furies, those terrible goddesses of vengeance, wept at his song. Finally, Orpheus reached the throne room of Hades and Persephone, where he sang of his love for Eurydice and begged for her return. His music was so moving that it melted the hearts of the underworld's rulers, and Hades agreed to allow Eurydice to return to the world of the living on one condition. Orpheus must not look back at her until they had both emerged into the sunlight. Overjoyed, Orpheus began the journey back to the surface, with Eurydice following behind him. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine the tragic conclusion of this tale, which has resonated through centuries of art and literature. As Orpheus neared the entrance to the upper world, his anxiety and love overcame his self-control. Unable to hear Eurydice's footsteps behind him and desperate to ensure she was still there, he turned around to look at her. In that instant, Eurydice faded back into the shadows, lost forever, and Orpheus was left alone with his grief. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice serves multiple functions in Greek culture. On one level, it represents the power of art and love to transcend even death itself, while also illustrating the tragic limitations of mortal will when confronted with divine law. The story emphasizes that even the most extraordinary human achievements, Orpheus's divine music, cannot permanently overcome the natural order. Death remains final, and attempts to cheat it ultimately fail due to human weakness and imperfection. The myth also reflects Greek attitudes toward marriage and gender relationships. Eurydice is portrayed as the passive object of Orpheus's quest, her own desires and agency largely absent from the narrative. This reflects the patriarchal assumptions of Greek society, where women's value was often measured primarily through their relationships with men. Yet the story also suggests that love between spouses can be so powerful that it motivates challenges to the cosmic order itself, elevating romantic love to a force comparable to divine power. In the context of the mystery religions, the Orpheus myth took on additional layers of meaning. Orpheus became a model for the religious initiate who gains special knowledge about the underworld and uses that knowledge to achieve a better fate after death. His failure to retrieve Eurydice could be interpreted as the inevitable fate of those who attempt the journey without proper preparation and initiation into the mystery's deeper teachings. The influence of the Orpheus myth on later culture cannot be overstated. It would inspire countless works of art, music, and literature throughout the centuries, from Virgil's Georgics to Monteverdi's opera to modern films and novels. The image of the artist hero who ventures into death's realm and temporarily overcomes it through the power of creative expression became one of the most enduring metaphors for the relationship between art and mortality. As the classical period gave way to the Hellenistic era following the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek underworld mythology continued to evolve and spread throughout the Mediterranean world. The cultural exchange that resulted from Alexander's campaigns brought Greek religious ideas into contact with Egyptian, Persian, Babylonian, and other Near Eastern traditions, leading to new synthetic forms of underworld belief that would profoundly influence the development of later religious systems. The Hellenistic period saw the rise of philosophical schools that offered competing theories about death and the afterlife. The Stoics generally maintained that the soul perished with the body, making the traditional underworld mythology purely metaphorical. The Epicureans similarly denied the soul's survival after death, arguing that fear of post-mortem punishment was one of humanity's greatest sources of unnecessary suffering. However, the Platonists and Neo-Pythagoreans continued to develop sophisticated theories about the soul's immortality and the various realms it might inhabit after death. The mystery religions flourished during this period, offering initiates personal salvation and detailed revelations about the afterlife. The Eleusinian mysteries remained the most prestigious of these cults, but they were joined by the mysteries of Dionysus, Isis, Mithras, and other deities who promised their followers blessed existence after death. These religions often incorporated underworld mythology into their ritual practices, with initiates undergoing symbolic journeys through death and rebirth that prepared them for their actual post-mortem experiences. The period also witnessed the development of more complex and detailed underworld geographies. Hellenistic writers described vast underground cities, elaborate palace complexes for the underworld deities, and specialized regions for different categories of souls. The neutral asphodel meadows were subdivided into various districts. The Elysian Fields were expanded to include multiple levels of blessedness, and Tartarus was organized into a complex system of punishments tailored to specific crimes. One of the most significant developments of the Hellenistic period was the increasing emphasis on moral judgment and the possibility of spiritual purification. Earlier, Greek traditions had generally portrayed the underworld as a place where souls endured their assigned fates, with little possibility of change or improvement. However, Hellenistic religious thought began to emphasize the possibility of spiritual growth and moral development even after death. This evolution is clearly visible in the writings of Plutarch, the 1st century CE biographer and philosopher who provided some of our most detailed descriptions of Hellenistic underworld beliefs. In his essay on the delays of divine vengeance, Plutarch describes a complex afterlife system where souls undergo various forms of purification and education before being assigned their final destinations. Some souls, he suggests, may even be reincarnated into new earthly lives to continue their moral development. Plutarch's vision of the underworld reflects the influence of Platonic philosophy, with its emphasis on the soul's inherent divinity and its potential for spiritual ascent. According to this view, the traditional punishments of Tartarus serve not merely as retribution, but as educational experiences designed to purify the soul of its earthly vices. Even the most wicked souls might eventually achieve redemption through sufficient suffering and spiritual growth. The Roman conquest of Greece during the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE brought Greek underworld mythology into contact with indigenous Roman religious traditions, leading to further synthesis and development. The Romans had their own ancient beliefs about death and the afterlife, centered on the worship of ancestors and the propitiation of underworld deities like Disparta and Proserpina. However, the sophistication and literary appeal of Greek mythology led to its widespread adoption throughout the Roman world, though often with distinctly Roman modifications. Roman poets like Virgil and Ovid played crucial roles in transmitting and transforming Greek underworld mythology for Latin audiences. Virgil's Aeneid, composed during the reign of Augustus, contains one of the most detailed and influential descriptions of the underworld in all of ancient literature. In Book 6, the hero Aeneas journeys to the underworld, guided by the Cumaean Sibyl, seeking to speak with the spirit of his father, Anchises. Virgil's underworld reflects both Greek mythological traditions and distinctly Roman concerns. The geography includes the familiar rivers and regions of Greek mythology, the Styx, Tartarus, Elysium. But the emphasis on judgment and moral categories reflects Roman legal thinking and social values. Aeneas encounters the spirits of unburied dead, infants who died prematurely, those who died unjustly, and warriors who fell in battle, each group occupying its own distinct region and receiving appropriate treatment. The Sibyl explains to Aeneas the complex process by which souls are judged and assigned their fates. The wicked are sent to Tartarus for punishment, while the virtuous enjoy the pleasures of Elysium. However, Virgil introduces an important innovation. Most souls, after spending time in their assigned regions, drink from the river Lethe to forget their previous existence and are then reincarnated into new earthly lives. Only those souls that have achieved perfect purification after multiple lifetimes are allowed to remain permanently in the blessed realm. This system of reincarnation represents a significant departure from traditional Greek underworld mythology, reflecting the influence of Pythagorean and Platonic philosophical traditions on Roman religious thought. Virgil's vision of the underworld as a place of moral education and spiritual development would profoundly influence later Christian thinking about purgatory and the purification of souls after death. As you feel sleep beginning to claim you more fully, let your mind drift through the long centuries of the Roman Empire, when Greek underworld mythology continued to evolve and adapt to changing cultural needs. The rise of Christianity during the first centuries CEE brought new challenges and opportunities for the development of afterlife beliefs. Early Christian writers were deeply influenced by Greek and Roman underworld traditions, but they also sought to distinguish their teachings from pagan mythology. The result was a complex process of appropriation, transformation, and rejection that would ultimately give birth to the elaborate Christian cosmology of heaven, hell, and purgatory. Many elements of Greek underworld mythology found their way into Christian thinking. The concept of post-mortem judgment, the existence of different realms for the righteous and wicked, the possibility of intercession for the dead, and the imagery of rivers, gates, and divine judges. However, Christian theology also introduced revolutionary new concepts that fundamentally altered the meaning of death and afterlife. The promise of bodily resurrection, the emphasis on divine grace rather than moral achievement, and the linear rather than cyclical view of time all represented significant departures from Greek mythological traditions. The Christian underworld became not a permanent destination, but a temporary holding place for souls awaiting the final judgment and the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. The artistic and literary traditions of the ancient world continued to preserve and transmit Greek underworld mythology long after the Christianization of the Roman Empire. Medieval manuscripts preserved the works of Homer, Virgil, and Ovid, ensuring that later generations would have access to the classical traditions, even as new religious systems dominated popular belief. Illuminated manuscripts depicting scenes from the underworld, sculptures decorating church facades with images drawn from classical mythology, and scholarly commentaries on ancient texts all helped to maintain the continuity of these ancient traditions. The Byzantine Empire, heir to both Greek culture and Christian theology, played a particularly important role in preserving classical underworld mythology. Byzantine scholars copied and preserved ancient manuscripts, wrote commentaries on classical authors, and continued to use mythological imagery in their art and literature. The tension between Christian orthodoxy and classical paganism created a complex cultural dynamic in which underworld mythology survived in transformed and often allegorized forms. Islamic culture also played a role in preserving and transmitting Greek underworld traditions. Muslim scholars translated and commented on Greek philosophical and literary works, including those that dealt with death and the afterlife. The Islamic concept of barzakh, the intermediate realm between death and resurrection, shows clear influence from Greek underworld mythology, while Islamic descriptions of paradise and hell incorporate many elements derived from classical sources. The Renaissance marked a major revival of interest in classical mythology, including the traditions of the Greek underworld. Humanist scholars recovered and edited ancient texts. Artists created new works inspired by classical themes, and poets and playwrights adapted ancient myths for contemporary audiences. The printing press enabled the widespread dissemination of classical works, making Greek underworld mythology accessible to readers throughout Europe and eventually the entire world. Dante's Divine Comedy, composed in the early 14th century, represents perhaps the most influential synthesis of classical underworld mythology with Christian theology. Although Dante's cosmology is fundamentally Christian, his Inferno draws heavily on Greek and Roman traditions, featuring classical figures like Charon, Minos, and Cerberus, alongside Christian devils and demons. Virgil serves as Dante's guide through hell and purgatory, explicitly connecting the medieval Christian vision with its classical predecessors. The influence of Dante's work on subsequent European literature cannot be overstated. His vivid descriptions of hell's geography, his systematic organization of punishments according to moral categories, and his integration of classical and Christian traditions established a template that would influence depictions of the underworld for centuries to come. From Milton's Paradise Lost to the Gothic novels of the 18th and 19th centuries, European literature continued to draw on this synthesis of classical and Christian underworld imagery. As you sink deeper into the peaceful embrace of sleep, let your consciousness drift through the centuries of the modern era, when Greek underworld mythology experienced yet another transformation through the lens of Romantic and Victorian sensibilities. The 18th and 19th centuries witnessed a renewed fascination with classical antiquity, driven partly by archaeological discoveries that brought the ancient world to vivid life. The excavation of Pompeii and Herculaneum revealed frescoes depicting underworld scenes, while the Elgin marbles and other Greek sculptures displayed in European museums sparked new interest in classical mythology. Romantic poets and artists found in Greek underworld mythology a rich source of imagery for exploring themes of death, love, and the supernatural. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice became particularly popular, inspiring works by Gluck, Offenbach, and countless other composers and writers. The tragic tale of love conquering death, if only temporarily, resonated with romantic sensibilities that emphasized emotion, individual experience, and the power of art to transcend mundane reality. The Victorian era brought its own distinctive interpretation of classical underworld mythology. The period's fascination with death, mourning, and the possibility of communication with the dead found expression in spiritualist movements that claimed to offer scientific proof of survival after death. While these movements drew primarily on Christian traditions, they also incorporated elements from classical mythology, particularly the idea that the dead retain their personalities and could communicate with the living under proper conditions. Archaeological discoveries during the 19th and early 20th centuries provided new insights into ancient Greek religious practices and beliefs about the afterlife. The excavation of ancient cemeteries, sanctuaries, and mystery cult sites revealed the material culture associated with death and underworld worship. Grave goods, votive offerings, curse tablets, and ritual implements all contributed to a more nuanced understanding of how ordinary Greeks, not just mythological heroes, related to the realm of the dead. The discovery of the Orphic gold tablets in various locations throughout the former Greek world was particularly significant. These thin sheets of gold, inscribed with instructions for the soul's journey through the underworld, provided direct evidence of the mystery religion's teachings about death and afterlife. The tablets revealed a complex mythology involving the soul's divine origins, its temporary imprisonment in mortal flesh, and its eventual return to celestial realms through proper knowledge and ritual preparation. The 20th century brought new challenges and opportunities for the interpretation of Greek underworld mythology. The development of psychology, particularly the work of Freud and Jung, offered new frameworks for understanding the psychological significance of death imagery and underworld symbolism. Freud's analysis of the Oedipal complex drew on Greek mythological themes, while Jung's concept of the collective unconscious suggested that underworld imagery represented universal human experiences and anxieties. Jungian analysis of underworld mythology emphasized its role as a metaphor for psychological transformation and spiritual growth. The descent into the underworld, whether undertaken by Orpheus, Persephone, or other mythological figures, was interpreted as a symbolic representation of the process of individuation, the psychological journey toward wholeness and self-realization. The various regions of the underworld, the neutral asphodel meadows, the blessed Elysium, the punitive Tartarus, were seen as representing different aspects of the psyche and different stages of psychological development. The rise of comparative mythology during this period also placed Greek underworld traditions in a broader global context. Scholars began to identify common themes and structures in underworld mythologies from different cultures, suggesting that certain patterns of thought about death and afterlife might be universal human experiences. The journey to the underworld, the judgment of the dead, the existence of different realms for different categories of souls, all these elements appeared in various forms throughout world mythology. This comparative approach revealed both the distinctive features of Greek underworld mythology and its participation in broader human patterns of thinking about death and transcendence. The Greek emphasis on individual moral responsibility, the importance of memory and identity in the afterlife, and the possibility of communication between living and dead all emerged as particularly characteristic features of the Greek tradition. The two world wars of the 20th century brought renewed urgency to questions about death, suffering, and the possibility of meaning in the face of mass destruction. Greek underworld mythology provided one framework for grappling with these questions, offering both comfort and challenge to those seeking to understand the nature of mortality and the possibility of hope beyond death. The image of heroes journeying to the underworld to rescue loved ones or gain wisdom resonated with the experiences of soldiers and civilians who had witnessed unprecedented destruction and loss. Contemporary literature and art have continued to draw on Greek underworld mythology, adapting its themes and imagery to address modern concerns. Writers like Jean Anouilh, Jean Cocteau, and Tennessee Williams have retold classical underworld stories for contemporary audiences, while artists like Anselm Kiefer and Cy Twombly have created visual works inspired by mythological themes. Popular culture has also embraced these ancient stories, with films, television shows, and video games regularly featuring characters and situations drawn from Greek underworld mythology. The enduring appeal of these ancient stories reflects their ability to address fundamental human concerns that transcend particular historical periods or cultural contexts. The fear of death, the hope for survival after death, the desire for justice and meaning, the power of love to transcend mortality. All these themes continue to resonate with contemporary audiences, just as they did with ancient Greeks. Modern scholarship has also brought new methodologies and perspectives to the study of Greek underworld mythology. Archaeological evidence continues to accumulate, providing insights into actual religious practices and beliefs rather than just literary representations. Anthropological approaches have illuminated the social functions of underworld mythology, showing how these stories help to establish and maintain social hierarchies, gender roles, and moral systems. Feminist scholarship has paid particular attention to female figures in underworld mythology, examining how stories, like the abduction of Persephone, both reflected and shaped ancient Greek attitudes toward women, marriage, and sexuality. The figure of Persephone as both victim and queen, simultaneously abducted maiden and powerful goddess, has been analysed as a complex representation of female experience and agency within patriarchal systems. Religious studies approaches have examined the relationship between underworld mythology and actual religious practices, showing how stories about the realm of the dead were integrated into ritual systems, mystery cults, and philosophical traditions. The development of concepts like judgment after death, moral purification, and spiritual transformation has been traced through various religious movements and intellectual traditions. As the night deepens and your breathing becomes more regular and peaceful, consider how the digital age has created new opportunities for encountering and interpreting Greek underworld mythology. Online databases make ancient texts more accessible than ever before, while digital humanities projects use computational methods to analyze mythological patterns and variations. Virtual reality applications allow users to experience reconstructed ancient sites and visualize mythological narratives in new ways. The internet has also facilitated new forms of creative engagement with these ancient stories. Fan fiction, online art, and social media discussions have created vibrant communities of people who continue to find meaning and inspiration in Greek underworld mythology. These contemporary adaptations often emphasize aspects of the stories that resonate with modern concerns. Themes of identity, belonging, family relationships, and the search for meaning in an uncertain world. Contemporary academic study of Greek underworld mythology has become increasingly interdisciplinary, drawing on insights from archaeology, anthropology, psychology, literary criticism, religious studies, and other fields. This interdisciplinary approach has revealed the complexity and richness of these ancient traditions, showing how they functioned simultaneously as religious beliefs, literary devices, philosophical metaphors, and social institutions. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to add new dimensions to our understanding of ancient Greek attitudes toward death and the afterlife. Excavations at sites like Aigai in Macedonia, where the royal tombs of the Macedonian dynasty have been discovered, reveal elaborate burial practices and artistic representations that provide insights into elite beliefs about death and immortality. The discovery of curse tablets, magical papyri, and other ritual objects shows how ordinary people sought to influence the realm of the dead through magical practices. The study of ancient Greek mystery religions has been revolutionized by new archaeological evidence and methodological approaches. The Eleusinian mysteries, in particular, have been the subject of intensive investigation, with scholars attempting to reconstruct the initiation rituals and teachings that promised initiates a blessed afterlife. While the specific details of these mysteries remain unknown due to the initiate's vows of secrecy, archaeological evidence and literary sources provide tantalizing glimpses into their practices and beliefs. The influence of Greek underworld mythology on contemporary therapeutic practices represents another interesting development. Psychologists and counselors have drawn on mythological narratives as frameworks for understanding grief, trauma, and the process of psychological healing. The journey to the underworld has been interpreted as a metaphor for the therapeutic process, with the therapist serving as a guide like Hermes or the Cumaean Sibyl, helping clients navigate the dark territories of their unconscious minds. Art therapy approaches have specifically utilized underworld imagery to help clients process experiences of loss and transformation. The myth of Demeter and Persephone, in particular, has been used to explore themes of separation, grief, and renewal in therapeutic contexts. The cyclical nature of Persephone's story, her annual descent to the underworld and return to the surface, provides a framework for understanding how individuals can emerge from dark periods of their lives with new wisdom and strength. The environmental movement has also found inspiration in Greek underworld mythology, particularly in the story of Demeter and Persephone. The myth's emphasis on the interconnection between human activity and natural cycles has been interpreted as an early recognition of ecological principles. Demeter's grief-induced withering of the earth serves as a metaphor for the potential consequences of environmental destruction, while Persephone's return offers hope for renewal and restoration. Contemporary feminist interpretations of Greek underworld mythology have continued to evolve, with scholars examining not only the obvious female figures like Persephone and Demeter, but also the roles of other women in these stories. The Furies, for example, have been reinterpreted as representatives of ancient matriarchal justice systems that were gradually supplanted by patriarchal legal institutions. Their transformation from vengeful goddesses to benevolent protectors in Aeschylus's Oresteia has been read as a metaphor for the historical suppression of female power and its eventual integration into male-dominated systems. The figure of Hecate, goddess of magic and crossroads who played an important role in the Demeter and Persephone story, has received particular attention from contemporary scholars and practitioners. As a goddess associated with liminality, the spaces between life and death, civilization and wilderness, knowledge and mystery, Hecate represents aspects of female experience that were often marginalized in classical Greek culture, but have gained new relevance in contemporary discussions of gender and spirituality. Queer theory has also found rich material in Greek underworld mythology, particularly in stories that involve gender transformation, same-sex relationships, and the fluidity of identity. The myth of Orpheus, for example, has been reinterpreted in light of his legendary rejection of women after losing Eurydice and his subsequent attraction to young men, which ultimately led to his death at the hands of the Maenads. The study of ancient Greek sexuality and gender relations has been revolutionized by new archaeological evidence and theoretical approaches. The discovery of grave goods and artistic representations that challenge traditional assumptions about gender roles in ancient Greece has led to more nuanced interpretations of mythological narratives. The underworld, as a realm where normal social categories are suspended or transformed, has been particularly fertile ground for exploring alternative constructions of gender and sexuality. As your consciousness continues to drift towards sleep, let yourself contemplate the profound ways in which Greek underworld mythology has shaped not only our understanding of death and afterlife, but also our broader cultural narratives about transformation, justice, and the human condition. These ancient stories continue to provide frameworks for thinking about fundamental questions that every generation must face anew. The enduring power of Greek underworld mythology lies not in its literal truth claims, but in its capacity to articulate universal human experiences through compelling narrative forms. The fear of death, the hope for justice, the pain of loss, the possibility of redemption. These themes transcend cultural and temporal boundaries, speaking to something fundamental about the human condition. In our contemporary world, faced with new challenges and uncertainties, Greek underworld mythology continues to offer resources for understanding and coping with mortality and meaning. The ancient Greeks' sophisticated thinking about death and afterlife provides alternatives to both simplistic religious dogma and materialist reductionism, offering complex and nuanced ways of thinking about the mysteries of existence. The mythological imagination that created the Greek underworld was fundamentally concerned with questions of justice and meaning. How can we understand a world where the good suffer and the wicked prosper? What happens to human consciousness after death? How can we find meaning in the face of mortality? These questions remain as pressing today as they were in ancient Greece, and the mythological narratives developed to address them continue to offer insights and inspiration. The process of creative adaptation and reinterpretation that has characterized the reception of Greek underworld mythology throughout history continues today. Each generation finds new meanings in these ancient stories, new ways of understanding their relevance to contemporary concerns. This ongoing process of interpretation and reinterpretation ensures that Greek underworld mythology remains a living tradition rather than a dead relic of the past. Contemporary digital media have created new possibilities for experiencing and interpreting these ancient narratives. Interactive fiction, virtual reality experiences, and multimedia installations allow audiences to engage with mythological stories in immersive ways that were impossible in earlier periods. These new media forms offer opportunities for creative exploration and interpretation that extend the tradition of mythological storytelling into new technological contexts. The globalization of contemporary culture has also facilitated new cross-cultural exchanges involving Greek underworld mythology. Artists, writers, and scholars from different cultural backgrounds bring their own perspectives and traditions to bear on these ancient Greek stories, creating hybrid forms that combine elements from different mythological systems. This cross-cultural dialogue enriches our understanding of both Greek mythology and the universal human experiences it represents. Educational applications of Greek underworld mythology have expanded significantly in recent decades. Teachers and curriculum developers have recognized the pedagogical value of these stories for introducing students to complex philosophical and ethical questions. The narrative structure of mythological stories makes abstract concepts more accessible and memorable, while their emotional resonance helps students develop empathy and understanding for different perspectives. The therapeutic applications of mythological storytelling have also gained recognition in various professional contexts. Narrative therapy approaches draw on the power of story to help individuals restructure their understanding of their own experiences and identities. Greek underworld mythology, with its emphasis on transformation and renewal, provides particularly rich material for therapeutic interventions. Museum exhibitions and archaeological site presentations have increasingly emphasized the experiential dimensions of ancient Greek religion and mythology. Interactive displays, immersive environments, and multimedia presentations help visitors understand not just the intellectual content of these ancient traditions, but also their emotional and spiritual significance for ancient practitioners. The continuing archaeological exploration of the Mediterranean world promises to yield new insights into ancient Greek religious practices and beliefs. Recent discoveries of intact tombs, sanctuary sites, and ritual objects continue to expand our understanding of how ordinary Greeks, not just mythological heroes, related to the realm of the dead. These material remains provide crucial evidence for understanding the gap between literary mythology and lived religious experience. The development of new analytical techniques, including DNA analysis, isotope studies, and advanced imaging technologies, allows archaeologists to extract unprecedented amounts of information from ancient remains. These scientific approaches are revealing new details about ancient burial practices, population movements, and cultural exchanges that influence the development of Greek underworld mythology. As the night grows deeper and your mind settles into rest, consider how the tradition of Greek underworld mythology represents one of humanity's most sustained and sophisticated attempts to grapple with the mystery of death and the possibility of meaning beyond mortality. From its origins in Bronze Age burial practices to its contemporary manifestations in digital media and therapeutic applications, this tradition has demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. The scholarly study of Greek underworld mythology continues to evolve, with new theoretical approaches and methodological innovations opening up fresh avenues for research and interpretation. Cognitive science approaches examine how mythological narratives relate to fundamental patterns of human cognition and emotion. Network analysis techniques map the relationships between different mythological figures and narratives, revealing structural patterns that might not be apparent through traditional literary analysis. The application of big data approaches to mythological studies promises to yield new insights into the transmission and transformation of these ancient stories across different cultural contexts and historical periods. By analyzing large corpora of mythological texts, scholars can identify patterns of variation and stability that illuminate the processes by which cultural traditions are preserved and modified over time. The intersection of mythology studies with environmental humanities represents another promising area of contemporary research. As societies around the world grapple with ecological crisis and climate change, the ancient Greek understanding of the relationship between human activity and natural cycles, as expressed in stories like the myth of Demeter and Persephone, offers valuable perspectives on sustainable living and environmental stewardship. The study of ancient Greek mystery religions continues to reveal new dimensions of how these mythological traditions functioned in actual religious practice. Recent discoveries of ritual objects, sanctuary sites, and inscriptional evidence provide insights into the specific practices and beliefs that promised initiates transformation and blessed afterlife. The relationship between mythological narratives and ritual practices emerges as a complex and dynamic interaction rather than a simple translation of story into action. The contemporary revival of interest in ancient philosophical traditions including Stoicism, Platonism, and Epicureanism, has brought renewed attention to the philosophical dimensions of Greek underworld mythology. These philosophical schools developed sophisticated theoretical frameworks for understanding death, moral responsibility, and the possibility of human flourishing that were intimately connected to mythological narratives about the afterlife. Modern physics and cosmology have also influenced contemporary interpretations of Greek underworld mythology. The ancient Greek vision of multiple realms of existence, separated by permeable boundaries that could be crossed under certain conditions, resonates with contemporary scientific theories about parallel universes, quantum mechanics, and the nature of space and time. While these scientific theories do not validate the literal truth of mythological narratives, they do suggest that the ancient Greek mythological imagination was grappling with profound questions about the nature of reality that continue to challenge contemporary science. The psychological study of grief and bereavement has drawn extensively on Greek underworld mythology, particularly the stories of Orpheus and Eurydice and Demeter and Persephone. These narratives provide frameworks for understanding the process of mourning and the possibility of healing after loss. The cyclical nature of Persephone's story, in particular, offers hope for renewal and transformation even in the face of devastating loss. The study of ancient Greek concepts of the soul and personal identity has revealed the complexity and sophistication of their thinking about consciousness and selfhood. The various Greek terms for soul, psyche, pneuma, thumos, suggest a nuanced understanding of different aspects of human consciousness and their potential survival after death. This complexity challenges simplistic dichotomies between ancient and modern thinking about mind and consciousness. Contemporary neuroscience has provided new perspectives on the psychological and neurological basis of religious experience, including beliefs about death and afterlife. Research on near-death experiences, altered states of consciousness, and the neural correlates of religious experience has illuminated some of the experiential bases that may have contributed to the development of ancient Greek underworld mythology. The study of ancient Greek medicine and its relationship to religious and mythological traditions has revealed the integrated nature of ancient Greek thinking about health, disease, and death. The cult of Asclepius, the healing god, was intimately connected to beliefs about the soul's journey after death and the possibility of divine intervention in human affairs. The practice of incubation, where patients slept in sacred precincts to receive healing dreams, represents a fascinating intersection of medical, religious, and mythological traditions. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, let your mind wander through the vast landscape of influence that Greek underworld mythology has had on human culture and consciousness. From the ancient mystery religions that promised initiates blessed afterlife to contemporary therapeutic practices that use mythological narratives to facilitate healing, these stories have provided frameworks for understanding the deepest questions of human existence. The artistic legacy of Greek underworld mythology continues to inspire creators across all media. Contemporary artists working in painting, sculpture, film, literature, music, and digital media continue to find inspiration in these ancient stories, creating new works that speak to contemporary audiences while honoring the enduring power of the original narratives. The educational applications of Greek underworld mythology extend beyond formal academic settings into various forms of public education and cultural enrichment. Museums, cultural centers, and educational institutions around the world use these stories to introduce audiences to ancient Greek culture, while exploring universal themes of mortality, justice, and transformation. The therapeutic applications of mythological storytelling have gained recognition in various professional contexts, from clinical psychology to pastoral care to community healing programs. The power of narrative to provide meaning and structure to human experience, exemplified in Greek underworld mythology, continues to offer resources for individuals and communities seeking to understand and cope with trauma, loss, and change. The philosophical dimensions of Greek underworld mythology continue to be explored by contemporary philosophers interested in questions of personal identity, moral responsibility, and the meaning of death. The ancient Greek understanding of the soul's journey through different realms of existence provides rich material for philosophical reflection on consciousness, continuity of identity, and the possibility of survival after death. The comparative study of world mythologies has revealed both the universal human concerns addressed by Greek underworld traditions and their distinctive cultural characteristics. The Greek emphasis on individual moral responsibility, the importance of memory and identity in the afterlife, and the possibility of transformation through knowledge and ritual preparation emerge as particularly characteristic features of this tradition. The study of ancient Greek language and literature continues to yield new insights into the nuances and complexities of underworld mythology. Detailed philological analysis of ancient texts reveals layers of meaning that may not be apparent in translation, while the discovery of new papyrus fragments and inscriptions occasionally provides fresh evidence for understanding these ancient traditions. The archaeological investigation of ancient Greek sites continues to provide material evidence for religious practices and beliefs associated with death and the afterlife. Recent discoveries of tombs, sanctuaries, and ritual objects contribute to our understanding of how mythological narratives were embedded in actual religious and social practices. The digital humanities have opened new possibilities for studying and presenting Greek underworld mythology. Online databases, virtual reconstructions, and interactive media allow scholars and the public to engage with these ancient traditions in unprecedented ways. These technological innovations ensure that Greek underworld mythology remains accessible and relevant to contemporary audiences. The global reach of contemporary culture has facilitated new forms of cross-cultural dialogue involving Greek underworld mythology. Artists, writers, and scholars from different cultural backgrounds bring their own perspectives to bear on these ancient stories, creating hybrid forms that enrich our understanding of both Greek traditions and universal human experiences. The environmental movement has found inspiration in Greek underworld mythology, particularly in narratives that emphasize the interconnection between human activity and natural cycles. The myth of Demeter and Persephone, with its emphasis on seasonal renewal and the consequences of separation from natural processes, offers perspectives on environmental stewardship that remain relevant to contemporary ecological concerns. The study of gender and sexuality in ancient Greece has been enriched by attention to the roles of women and the representation of gender relations in underworld mythology. The complex figure of Persephone, simultaneously victim and queen, maiden and goddess, continues to inspire feminist interpretations that explore the construction of female identity and agency within patriarchal systems. The psychological study of myth and symbol has revealed the continuing relevance of Greek underworld imagery for understanding unconscious processes and psychological development. The descent to the underworld, undertaken by various mythological heroes, serves as a powerful metaphor for the psychological journey towards self-knowledge and integration. The therapeutic applications of mythological narratives have expanded beyond clinical settings into community-based healing programs, educational initiatives, and personal development practices. The enduring power of Greek underworld stories to provide meaning and structure to human experience continues to offer resources for individuals and communities seeking to understand and cope with life's challenges. As the night reaches its deepest point and your consciousness approaches the threshold of sleep, consider how the final saga of Greek underworld mythology is not an ending, but a continuing transformation. These ancient stories, born from humanity's earliest attempts to understand death and transcendence, continue to evolve and adapt to new cultural contexts and contemporary needs. They remind us that the questions they address: what happens when we die? How can we find justice in an unjust world? What gives meaning to mortal existence? Are not merely historical curiosities, but living concerns that each generation must address anew. The underworld that the ancient Greeks imagined was not simply a place of punishment or reward, but a complex realm where souls underwent transformation and judgment, where the consequences of earthly actions played out in eternal drama, and where the boundaries between life and death proved more permeable than they might initially appear. This vision of death as transition rather than termination, of judgment as education rather than mere retribution, and of the afterlife as a continuation of moral and spiritual development continues to offer alternatives to both simplistic religious dogma and materialist reductionism. The figure of Hades himself, that shadowy sovereign of the dead, emerges from this long tradition not as a devil or demon, but as a necessary and even benevolent force in the cosmic order. His realm provides the final accounting for human actions, the ultimate resolution of earthly injustices, and the possibility of continued existence beyond the boundaries of mortal life. Even in his terrible majesty, Hades represents the Greeks' recognition that death, however fearsome, is part of the natural order and deserving of respect rather than mere terror. The rivers of the underworld, Styx, Acheron, Cocytus, Phlegethon and Lethe, continue to flow through human imagination as symbols of the transitions and transformations that define the human condition. They remind us that crossing from one state of being to another requires both courage and preparation, that some journeys cannot be undertaken lightly, and that the price of transformation is often the loss of what we have been in service of what we might become. The judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, represent the ancient Greek belief that justice, however delayed or imperfect in mortal life, ultimately prevails. Their eternal tribunal suggests that human actions have consequences that extend far beyond the boundaries of individual existence, that moral choices matter not just for their immediate effects, but for their place in the larger cosmic order. The mythological heroes who journeyed to the underworld, Orpheus seeking his beloved Eurydice, Heracles capturing Cerberus, Theseus attempting to rescue Persephone, embody the human desire to transcend the limitations of mortality through courage, love, and determination. Their stories remind us that while the natural order cannot be permanently overcome, it can be challenged, and in that challenge, we discover something essential about the nature of human dignity and aspiration. The mystery religions that promised to initiate special knowledge about the underworld and blessed existence after death represent the ancient Greeks' recognition that death is not merely a biological event, but a spiritual transition that can be prepared for and potentially transformed through proper understanding and ritual preparation. These traditions acknowledged that the fear of death is one of humanity's most fundamental concerns and sought to address that fear through both intellectual understanding and emotional preparation. The philosophical traditions that grew out of Greek culture, Platonism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, each offer different perspectives on death and the afterlife, while drawing on the rich mythological heritage of underworld traditions. They remind us that thinking about death is not morbid preoccupation, but essential philosophical work, necessary for understanding what it means to live a meaningful human life. The artistic and literary traditions that have preserved and transmitted Greek underworld mythology across the centuries testify to the enduring power of these ancient stories to speak to universal human concerns. From the frescoes of Pompeii to the paintings of the Renaissance, from the operas of the Baroque period to the films of the contemporary era, these stories continue to provide frameworks for exploring the deepest questions of human existence. In our contemporary world, faced with new challenges and uncertainties, Greek underworld mythology offers neither easy answers nor simple comfort. Instead, it provides what it has always provided: a sophisticated and nuanced way of thinking about mortality, meaning, and transcendence that honors both the reality of death and the possibility of significance beyond individual existence. The underworld that emerges from this long tradition is not a place of terror, but a realm of transformation. Not a destination to be feared, but a part of the journey to be understood. It reminds us that death is not the opposite of life, but its necessary completion, not the negation of meaning, but its final revelation. In the shadows of that ancient realm, illuminated by the flickering light of mythological imagination, we glimpse something essential about the human condition: that we are beings who must die, but who can, through story and memory, art and love, create meaning that outlasts our individual mortality. The Greek underworld, in all its complexity and mystery, stands as one of humanity's most profound meditations on the nature of existence and the possibility of transcendence. As you slip into the peaceful realm of sleep, carrying with you the echoes of these ancient stories, you participate in the same timeless human endeavor that gave birth to these myths: the attempt to find meaning in the face of mortality, to create beauty in the shadow of death, and to affirm the enduring significance of the human journey through the mysterious territories of existence.